I continue to get questions about where are we in the process of the Bears maybe moving to Arlington Heights. Right now we're in Springfield. There is a battle going on about how this gets funded. And so I have with me, I'm Collin Corbett, I have with me Ed Sullivan from EOSConsulting. Not only is he a lobbyist down in Springfield, but he spent 24 years as an assessor. And so if there's someone who can answer for us the tax question of this, it's Ed. So thanks, Ed, for coming out.
Sure, happy to be here.
All right, obviously we're big Bears fans. We want to see the best for the Bears, but the question is this even going to happen? And so I guess I'll start there. I know there's a discussion over the funding of this. Where are we on that?
So what we've seen is the governor and a lot of other legislators say, well, a multi-billion-dollar corporation shouldn't be getting free money from the state. And so the governor has basically ruled out any state dollars to help this project. But there is a bill out there called the Mega Project Assessment Freeze and Payment Law, commonly referred to as what's called a pilot, payment in lieu of taxes.
Okay.
And so there is legislation that's been put out there by the local Senator Gillespie, that has put this bill out there to get the discussion started, if you will. I would say she's not necessarily for it, but has agreed to put it out there to allow a discussion to move forward.
Okay, so some of us have heard of this pilot law program, and it is confusing as heck for those of us who don't understand property taxes or these ridiculous laws. So break us down for us. What in the heck is this?
Sure. So the closest thing that I could say is it's the closest to a TIF, a tax increment financing district. In a TIF, the assessed value keeps growing, but the taxes remain flat, and they're distributed to local units of government as they normally would. Under a pilot, the assessment on the project is frozen at where it is the year prior to Illinois Department of Revenue certifying the project. And so these types of projects can only be $500 million above, 20 years, and that's controlled through the local municipality, which would be Arlington Heights in this instance. And so what they do is they freeze the assessed value. And so how local units of government, schools, Arlington Heights, whatever the fire districts would receive their funding through the property taxes, that would remain the same. The difference now is as the project grows in value, they add the stadium, they add restaurants, they add potential other commercial spots. That assessed value is frozen, and so no more taxes, but the company would then do what's called a payment in lieu of taxes, and that would be negotiated at the local level, not the state level. It would be negotiated with the municipality on a payment to these taxing districts to make up the difference that what they would have otherwise received from property taxes.
Okay, so this is resulting in an increase of funding to these local governments. And regardless of how it's negotiated, they're getting more funding than they're getting right now based on what's happening, right?
Yes, they would get more funding. So what the Bears are looking for is property tax certainty. They want to know how things are going to take place over time. And so I understand that. Why would I go in and put billions of dollars into a project if I didn't understand the tax implications moving forward? And so, yes, while they're not getting the property taxes, they are getting a payment moving forward. And so the question is, what would that payment be and what would it look like? That's all going to be negotiated. And I'm sure that this law, should they move forward on that, will change between now and when.
So who are those entities? Because you hear $1 billion, everyone's coming with their hands out. And I've heard like the school districts are trying to get their cut. I mean, who's actually driving this train? Who's really going to be the leader of that locally?
So right now this bill is being pushed by the local municipality and obviously the Bears. And so they're out there saying, okay, here is a way that we can bring more funding in to the local schools, the local municipalities, the fire districts, the park districts, but still give us certainty. And so really what has taken place is a lot of the schools have pushed forth and said, well, we're really afraid of what will happen to our funding, because when they talk about assessment certainty, what they're saying really is it's not going to be the full impact of what we would have gotten otherwise. And so that's really the phrase, what would we have gotten otherwise versus what are we going to get under this new law.
And I'm sure the Bears are saying if the property's vacant, you're getting nothing or close to nothing. So, hey, be happy you're getting something.
Well, that's exactly right. And actually worse, right now, this is a vacant, it's a vacant piece of property. It's a property that is not being used commercially. And so they have a reduced value, or should, let me rephrase it. If I'm their property tax lawyer, I'm going to the county and saying, this is a commercial property, it's not producing income, so my value should be even less. And so that's probably what's happening right now. And the reality is, if they leave it that way, that's the way it's going to be, versus what is the economic impact the Bears and all the different projects they want to do, what would that do for the community? And that's what they should be looking at.
You mentioned broader impacts. I mean, this bill wouldn't just impact the Bears. Isn't it being talked about being used in other ways to benefit the state of Illinois?
Sure. We have a law that says you can't have a single subject. So you can't just draw this bill and just say the Bears. And so what they do is they make it $500 million or above. That could be large commercial developments. It could be a large energy producing development. It could be a solar type of development, something that could potentially bring in a lot of different people. And we have seen that. So like Illinois Manufacturers Association and the Chamber of Commerce have come on board. I've heard that depending on what can be done, certain environmental groups might come on board. And so that's bringing out a larger array of people that could potentially support this.
To bring in bigger projects into the state of Illinois, some excitement and vitality to the state, which
Correct.
Seems like a positive thing.
That would.
You mentioned different groups getting on board. What is the likelihood of this actually happening? I know the session this year has been condensed. We don't have as long of a session typically, and that kind of runs into some election dates. So what are the likelihood that this actually happens in the next couple of weeks?
Well, the first thing we have is politics. You have a mayor's race that's taking place, and at this point, both mayoral candidates in the runoff have said they want the Bears to stay in Chicago. And so they still have to get through that. And then the General Assembly is on break for 2 weeks. And then they want to adjourn by the middle of May. And so the likelihood of this happening between now and the end of, or the adjournment, which is, I think, the 17th of May, is, I would not bet on that happening.
And weren't they saying that we're trying to get some things done in April, not let alone May? So
Right.
The odds of this getting done that quickly seem pretty slim. What's the next chance that something could happen?
Well, I think what happens is once the election takes place, you have a new mayor, then you can have these folks all get together over the summer and start negotiating this out. What does this look like? Why do we want to do it? We want to see facts and figures of what is the net economic impact of this type of development on the community. And so are there going to be residential buildings? That would affect schools. Is there not going to be residential buildings? That's not going to affect schools. But when you put that type of infrastructure, without schools, the biggest entity that's going to be affected is the municipality, because they're going to have to police this. They're going to have roads. They're going to have more cops, more plow trucks, all the different things that would be needed to help out this development.
I know Arlington Heights has already been scouting locations across the country to learn what they're going to need to do. So
Correct.
Clearly this is going to take a lot of negotiations. So you're saying, maybe it happens, but it probably ain't going to happen before the end of this session, right? So what is that? It's called veto session later in the year. Is that kind of what you think they're
veto
targeting?
session will take place October, November. If this would take place, I think the negotiations would take place this summer, and then over veto session, if they want to move it forward, they certainly can. Like I said, the Bears just closed on this property, and so there's a lot of due diligence that has to be done on that. And so they're a little out in front of this actually taking place, but they're doing the right thing. They're putting it out there, having the discussion, see where people are at, and then they'll have to come back and allay some of those concerns.
Well, as you know, down in Springfield, getting anything passed is a numbers game, right? You need a certain number of votes. The question is always, how do you get those votes? Because you're going to need votes out of the city of Chicago, most likely. And who's going to vote to let the Bears leave the city? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, and that's the biggest discussion going forward is how do City Chicago legislators vote to, in essence, do something to allow the Bears to leave and be part of that? So what do they get in return? And that's kind of Illinois in a nutshell. It's all negotiation. And so what I would see is if this starts to become more real, then people will start coming out with what are their asks. And something of that nature will start getting rolled into one, and we'll go from there. But I think it really has to start with the Bears putting out what is the net economic impact to the state, because then you say, okay, well, in taxes, you're going to get X amount of dollars to the state. Let's say it's $100 million. Okay, well, there's a lot of groups out there that think that social services should be increased in funding. Well, maybe that's the direction that you go and say, well, any money coming out of this, pilot project or pilot taxation, then can be directed to social services or pensions or a different, name the entity that you think you need more money in, and then it's 60 in the House, 30 in the Senate, and the governor's signature, and you have a deal.
So it seems to you the strategy is roll it out this session, get the conversation going, negotiate over the summer, lock it in a veto session.
Yes, even the veto session might be pushing it just because you might not have the Bears having all their information out by then. Let's say that they do, and potentially it could be done certainly over summer into veto. If not, then early of 2024.
Interesting.
Yep.
I guess final question would be a fun one. Bears are finally starting to make some moves. What do you think? You think we're going to have a decent year this year?
It's nice to see the 5 players that they've just picked up. I've been a Bears fan. I'm a Bears fan my whole life, and it's sometimes it's a little lonely for sure. But this number 9 pick can get potentially a really good defensive player. I would like them to focus a little bit more on the offensive line to protect our quarterback, who's supposedly your player of the future. So let's protect him and let him do his thing and throw to this brand new wide receiver that we have.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I live 5 minutes from what was Arlington Park. It's sad for me to lose my park, but if that becomes the new Bears Stadium, I'm certainly not going to mind about that.
Certainly.
Cool. Well, thanks, Ed, for joining us. We'll continue to keep you posted on what's going on. If you'll remember, we did some polling on this. We've been talking about this now for a good year, so we'll do our best to keep you posted on, are the Bears moving, and if so, what's that going to look like? Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you more soon.